Hey, welcome to Adobe Live. I'm Danielle Morimoto, and I'm a design manager here at Adobe. I've been working primarily right now on Creative Cloud tools on the web and bringing all those amazing creation tools that you know and love on desktop over to the web. And today we are joined for part 2 of 3D illustration by none other than Anu. Anu, welcome to day 2. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, I know we were chatting a little bit before this, like day 1, a little bit of the jitters, but I feel like we've got those all shaken out and we'll see, and we're ready to kick off day 2 of the stream. For sure. So Anu's going to be continuing her part 2 designs of 3D illustration. So yesterday was designing in Illustrator and Dimension. Today, probably kicking things into Photoshop as well, designing some packaging design. So that'll be really fun. And we also are going to be doing a artist spotlight later. So definitely stay tuned for that, where we're going to be walking through a really amazing artist's work and just like taking a look at all of the great content that they have. That being said, I also want to call out that this is a week of women. So we have a really great set of content all week long by women identifying artists, designers, photographers, and hosts. And so it's just really exciting in honor of Women's History Month. And today, being International Women's Day, we just have an all women's cast. So some really great content. Make sure that you check it all out on the stream. And let us know where you're tuning in from. If you're in the chat, make sure that you're heading over to Behance specifically to engage with us. And Anu and myself will be taking a look at all the comments that you have to say and where you're tuning in from. I'm live from San Francisco. Anu, I know you're over in New York. We were just talking a little bit about the weather over there and how temperamental it is. But Anika, I see you're back on the stream for day 2, and Wade here, and everybody, Steve. So hello, and thank you for joining the stream. With that, I will let you, Anu, maybe reintroduce yourself to everybody here.
Yeah.
Cool, Anu. Yeah, you want to go ahead and intro yourself?
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Anu. I am a graphic designer, primarily doing packaging, branding, and 3D design. So here you can see that I do some packaging, and then I've done 36 days of type. I'd also do 3D codes. This is something we worked on yesterday. If you didn't tune in yesterday, you can always feel free to go to my website and see some of my 3D work. So today we'll be running through doing some Dimension and Illustrator again, and maybe a bit of Photoshop as well. I can quickly run through what I'll be doing today.
Wonky project. I love this one.
So, yes. So today we are going to be doing a toy design project using Dimension and Illustrator, and I can get started with designing. So this is a brief of what we'll be doing. So Wonky is basically a modular toy that encourages children to imagine and create wonky faces. And the toy consists of 50 shapes, and it also has 20 connectors. And then children can make all sorts of different kinds of faces using different shapes. So we can get started first with Illustrator. So what you see here is basically a set of shapes that I'd created in advance. On the left is just the black and white version of, yeah, here it is, with all the different shapes I'm planning on using. And I also have all the dimensions written down. So the dimensions are for if you want to produce it in real life, like you need to list down, you need to make sure basically that you have all the dimensions so that it fits into your box. You know what sort of artboard you want to create to make the faces and all of that. So here I have put together a number of different shapes. So this came from creating a specific kind of faces I started with, which I will explain in a bit. This is like the color version where I chose the color palette. Again, like we spoke about yesterday, I use a lot of bright colors. Again, sticking to the same thing today. And so how I came up with these shapes is by starting to create faces first. So on the right, I have like a couple of shapes that I picked up from the previous artboard. So to make faces, so like the basic structure of the face is basically eyes, nose, and lips. So I have the lips and I have a moustache here. So if you want to create a female or a male, and then very basic, there's a circle and there's this curved sort of shape here. So I'm going to start by making the eyes first. So let's see, I have the two eyes. Then let's say I want to use the triangle shape. There's a nose. So as I was creating this is how I figured out what kind of different shapes I'll be needing. So the set you saw before is something that I created after I made like one or two faces, and then I figured out, okay, this is what I need to create like multiple numbers of them.
Do you always start with black and white first, like in gray tone? And
yeah.
then...
Yeah, I think that's it sets like a certain guideline on what, like just setting your basic dimensions first and then applying color to them. So, yeah. So let's see, I want to use this. So here we're trying to create like faces that are not realistic. It's a toy meant for children, so you can get creative with this. It doesn't need to be like you can get big with the eyes or the nose. It's up to you how you want to play around with it. The challenge here, I would say, is even though you're using different proportions, it still needs to come together to look like a face. So sometimes taking things completely out of proportion might not, you might not be able to recognize it's a face. So like maybe not going like to Picasso and staying within like something you could probably, like children can recognize.
The mustache is classic. I will say every time, as soon as you put the mustache on it, it made me smile.
So maybe I want the face to be looking somewhere on the right. Can also keep it in the center. Maybe you can change the color of the eyes to 2 different colors. See how that looks. Yeah, I think we're good with this for a starter. I'm gonna bring in this to use like as an eyebrow. Yeah, make sure to keep playing around with the proportions till you feel like, you know, you've got something right. Yeah, I think we can. So now we can try using the 3D feature on Illustrator. So you go to Window, 3D and Materials, and then it pops up on the window pops up on the right here. So since we're going to be converting these into actual, like you want to visualize how the toy will look, so which is why we're converting this 2D face into 3D. So here I'm going to use the inflate feature. So I'm going to click on each shape and then inflate it. So you can always render here to see how it looks, but in this case, I'm going to use Dimension to render because it's a more powerful 3D tool compared to Illustrator. So Illustrator, since it's still vector-based, right? So I prefer rendering on Dimension. So once we have that, we can you can start exporting each of these shapes. So the way you do that is you can just go to export selection and you have like an asset that pops up here. So you can name it. Let's see, this is the eye blue. And then choose the folder where you want it to be. So I choose this. And you have to export as a 3D file. So 3D means it has to be OBJ. So we're not using PNG or JPEGs here. OBJ is the file format that you need to export in. And then you say export asset, right? So you can actually, I think, let's try grouping things together and see what happens when you export. Yeah, so when you select two things together and say export, it's actually gonna export as one, let's say one unit. So you wanna have it as different units so that you can play around with them on Dimension. So if you export it as one unit, you probably won't be able to move it around much. So again, you can start exporting all your other shapes.
This is great. I know that Anika in the chat was just curious about your process in general, especially like if you do export anything out of Illustrator and like what that workflow is like. So kind of very timely that you happen to be doing that.
Yeah. It can get, like I'm naming everything because it can get confusing when you have multiple assets to export. So just better to have everything in place when you export. And that's the last one.
Last but not least, the nose.
Yes. So now we can move on to Dimension and see how we can bring this face together using textures and colors and lighting. So on Dimension, you can open up a new file. I'm going to resize it to 1600 by 1600. And 300 is my resolution. So if you, oops, I think it didn't resize. Yeah.
Will you remind people why you're choosing that particular dimension?
Yeah, so I plan to use a square artboard because I feel like, so let me just jump back to Illustrator. So because the form of the face is more squarish, so I want the artboard to be square as well. Again, if you make faces that are like longer, you can use a rectangular artboard, but because this face is more in a squarish dimension, which is why I plan to use a square here. And again, like I brought it up yesterday, that 1080 by 1080 is what you generally use for Instagram and other digital platforms, but it can get a bit pixelated when you try to enlarge them. So it's always better to start bigger and then, scale it down to whatever size you require. So I'm gonna go back to where I saved all my shapes, and I'm gonna drag them onto Dimension. So I'm gonna select, let's see if I can do that. Yeah, it allows me to import one at a time. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. Probably just gonna bring in everything first and then go ahead and resize them. So that's the nose. Then we have the eye. Gonna duplicate that, create another eye. Then you have the eyebrows, yeah. And the mustache, yeah. So, yep, you can see that the proportions are off. So I'm gonna go fix that. So at this point, because I have my, the proportions almost right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring on an image that I had saved in earlier here. So this now acts as a background for me to place all my 3D objects and keep the proportions right. And I'm also gonna, so here I'm gonna remove the ground plane. So ground plane is what you basically have here. That what the shape is sitting on is the ground plane. So Dimension gives me the flexibility to remove the ground plane. So now basically there's it becomes hollow. There's no ground. So using sorry, go ahead.
The sketch that you had is kind of like a little outline almost.
Yes, exactly. because the proportions have to be like perfectly, aligned. So I like to use the sketch that I created as a reference. And it's also easier, probably, to just make things quicker, to set everything correctly.
Totally. I was going to say, you also already did that work. Like you already have that sketch and you had what you had in mind. So it's nice to just like reuse that quickly as like a template.
Right. Yeah. So make sure to keep like moving your camera around to see if things are aligning correctly, because if you see them from the front, it always looks like things are aligned. So when you shift it to the side is when you notice that things could be completely off. And also, one other thing to note is that when you turn the camera, it doesn't necessarily turn the background. It's just the background is just a 2D flat image, so that's not going to turn. Yeah, so things I'm doing here, like moving things slightly up and down, is when the sketch at the back really helps. Yeah, you can see that like this, it looks like the eyebrows in the right place, but the minute I shift the camera, you can see that, it's completely off.
It's way off there on its own.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't realize that until you actually turn the camera around. So you don't notice these things if you don't, unless you render. Once you render, because of the shadow, you can start to tell that some things are closer and some things are far.
So Myth is wondering, can you lock your other layers in place when you're moving other ones?
I don't think you can lock them. Actually, you can. Yeah, you can lock them. There's a lock like symbol here on the right next to the eye, which is the visibility of each layer. So yes, you can lock it.
Yeah, so if you don't want to be accidentally grabbing stuff, if you have a ton of like things on the artboard, you can start to things. And like you showed yesterday, you can also like hide or show different things too. So
yeah,
it's getting in the way, you can just turn off the visibility.
Yeah. Gonna place that there. And I'm gonna duplicate that. And I'm gonna start saving. Say wonky face.
So what was your like inspiration or like the prompt for this project?
So this is something I did as part of my coursework. The idea was to create anything modular. So modular means it basically has endless possibilities. So to create a toy that has endless possibilities was my idea, because when you play a game, it always comes to an end, especially when you design something for kids. They just like get bored of it so quickly. So when you have something that's a modular toy and you can make like how many ever combinations of faces that you want to, so that adds like a certain amount of it's like unexpected. It builds your creativity because you can keep making things. So that was my thought process behind how I got why I did a toy design, and specifically like designing faces.
Yeah, and it's fun because you're using basic shapes, which is also really classic for something like a kid toy, but it's also very true to like your style, in that what we were seeing yesterday in the other stream from you, a lot around kind of like basic shapes to create letter forms. So also like very much your style coming through in both of the projects.
Right. And I think I always like to explain, like I like to go through projects that just have basic forms, because there's actually so much you can build using that. It's not limiting at all. So I'm gonna go to preview, like render, so you can see that the light is like really harsh. So I'm gonna go and change that. So you can just reduce the intensity of the light if you wanna want something a bit softer. And also because this is all white right now, which is why you see that it's like going extremely bright white. So if you want to switch back to, like you want to remove the image, you can just click on color again and it goes away, the image at the back. I'm going to keep it just so that I have my color references. So now I'm going to go ahead and add material to this. So for this, I want to make it feel like a cushion sort of thing, like fabric. So for fabric material, you can always go ahead and choose like your Adobe standard materials that you have here. You can choose, I think there's one below that. Yeah. There's like felt, there's denim, and there are multiple other fabrics that you can use. But for this specific one, I decided to go to Adobe Substance Share. So I'm going to pull that up here. So this is a place where you can actually download different kinds of material that are not there on that are not readily available on Dimension. So I think this is like a really nice space to get. Sorry, let me just, yeah. So this is a really nice space to get different kinds of material that you can play around with. So I went ahead and let me see. So if I type fabric,
has so much, like it's like a marketplace of a ton of different fabrics and textures, and the watermelon one is fun. Like it's like crazy the variety that's on here.
Yeah. So I chose this particular one because it looks like it's some sort of a a cushion or something you can like really, it looks like something you can touch and squeeze. So that's why I went ahead with this. I downloaded this material. So I'm gonna open up Dimension again. I have my material here. I'm gonna just drag and drop that in. And yeah, so this is what the material is. And to change the colors, you go to under action, you can see the material icon. And then you see so depending on the material, you get like multiple properties. So this one has a lot you can change. So because there are so many threads going across this, the material, so you have like different colors you can change here. So let's see. So one thing you can do is actually select color based on the background image that you have. So what I mean by this is, let me just open this up. Yeah. So you have the sample color icon here. You select that and you click on the red at the back. So you actually get the red on the material. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that to all. So I have the red that I want, and then you can go ahead and repeat that on all of them. So I can take you through that. So again, drag and drop and start changing colors.
Yeah, I think what's amazing is, so Substance materials, like those Adobe Substance materials, have, based off of the creator who made it, like there are so many presets, like so many different settings that you can adjust.
Yeah.
Like choose like grass or whatever. There's like the length of the the grass itself, or like there's so many details that you can start to play with and really like customize and make it even more like your own, or what you had in mind for each of the materials.
Yeah, it's really great. Yep, this.
And in the chat, Robert was wondering if you can import material that you make in Capture to Dimension. So yes, if you use the Capture app and you start to like capture different materials or things in the world, all of that is definitely something that you can then bring into Dimension, and those two applications should talk to each other. So yes.
Yep, almost there. The eyebrow. So keep in mind that you can bring anything, like any OBJ file that you create on Illustrator here. So there's actually a lot of things you can play around with. It's not just this. You can, like there's the revolve feature as well. So even if you draw just like a rectangle and you revolve, you get like this whole cylinder shape, which you can bring on. I've just used the inflate feature, but you guys should explore like all the other 3D features over there. Yep, so that's done. So I'm gonna remove my background and keep it a flat color and do the render preview. Can play around with the lighting a bit because I feel like it's still maybe looking too bright. Yeah. So next thing is to go to render, and you can select low, medium, or high. Let's just say I go for low. And you can select your folder and hit render. So this is when you see like the actual material start coming to life. And I'm gonna switch over here to show you what that actually looks like. So you can see that the left is 2D and the right is 3D. Basically the same process that I followed just now. And it really, it just makes things look so much better once you've rendered it and brought it to 3D. Over here, I've also used like this textured background as sort of an artboard. So that's something you can add. It's not like, you don't have to add it. You can also just keep it without a background. But like I said yesterday, that when you add a background, when you add like a surface at the back, it gives you the shadow. So it's nice it gives you like more of that 3D feel versus this hollow feeling at the back. So yeah, that's rendering. So while that's happening, I'll show you a couple of other 2D faces that I had here. And it's the same process that you can follow for these as well. Pulled up some shapes from the artboard here, brought them onto a square artboard and tried making different sort of faces.
These are really fun. I like seeing the variety of all of them.
Yeah, like I said, right? It's because it's supposed to be a modular toy. So technically you can actually make many, many more. These are just some examples that I created for, for a kid to get started. But now it's up to, whoever uses the kit to just go ahead and get creative.
And I think to your point too, like you can tell how much of a difference not just the 3D makes, but just like texture. Cause like if you look at your Illustrator version that you did try to start to get like just the 3D effect going,
right.
It doesn't have any texture on it. It's like, kind of a soft 3D moment, but the texture makes a really big difference too.
Yeah, it does. So I'm gonna jump on here again to show you. So this is the 2D on the left, 3D on the right. This is another one. And here you have the third one. So let's jump back to, so that's done. So this is a low quality render, which is actually pretty good. So that's something that renders within a few minutes. So that's one part of this whole, actually this is the main part of the toy is what you need to design first. So this is the main part of the whole process. And after I mentioned that I did the face first, right? And to get an idea of the kind of different shapes that I'll need to get all these and much more. So once I made these shapes here, I also made sure that I converted all of them into 3D just to give the user an idea of all that's there. So this is a version of that where things are just thrown into a space and it looks like you can just pick up anything and you can play with it. So that's the vibe that I wanted to go with here versus like the way I've assembled it in the 2D file, just one shape. So that was more of like a template for me to understand everything that I have, all the dimensions. So I got the shapes onto Dimension and then made them like this, put them in like a nice layout. And the next step for me was, so in order to make the faces, you actually need to have these sort of pins at the back. It's not like anything sharp. It's because this is fabric, you can actually poke anything, like just poke like a stick sort of thing into it and then push it into an artboard. So the artboard is down here. The artboard is what these different shapes fit into. You can just push them push them into the artboard, and then the face will be here is basically is what you get. So let me jump back here. Yeah, so this is the process. So you have the 2D, change it into different shapes, and then you're showing how all these shapes come together. So this is like a side view of the face. So when you look at it from the side, I've just taken all the like given different levels to each shape so that you can understand how it comes together. And when you look at it from the front, I think this is this particular one. So when you look at it from the front, this is what it is. So that was the process of how I got the toy together first initially. And the next step was to design like the logo and what the name would be. So first you're getting the product out. So once the product comes out, then you go do the branding. So for the branding, I decided to call the toy Wonky because the faces are wonky. So I decided to go with that name. And here are some of my iterations of my initial for the logo. I was trying to make a W for all of these, the ones at the top. Was trying to use the same shapes that I made, the shapes that I used for the faces. I was trying to bring them in and try to make a logo with that. And then I decided that because I already have so much going on with the faces and the shapes, so it may be too much if I have a logo plus the logo, the text underneath it. So I decided to go with a complete logo type. And this is what I had done next. So I made the font, I played around with each letter so that the wonky actually looks wonky. It's more, the logo is somewhat expressive. And also adding details like changing the hole in the O. I just shifted it slightly to the left instead of keeping it in the center. So I think small details like that really add to it. And also decided the color palette over here that you can see on the right. So using different colors for the logo and seeing how it looks on different colored backgrounds. This is important to check because all colors need to go well with each other. And when you go a lot more into the branding process, you'll have to, decide brand guidelines and, go into all of those details. So at this point, it's good to know what you think can be used and can't be used. So for example, if I feel like this pink is too close to the red, it's not really standing out. So this is the time when I can, change it and decide, okay, I like the red and the pink are never going to interact in this brand.
This is so fun to see the process. I also like sort of your thought process from going before this of like trying to use all the shapes, trying to make those marks, and then realizing I have a lot going on with all the other pieces. Like, let me simplify it a little bit. And this also still has like elements of like the simple shapes, like the little line above wonky. Like you don't necessarily need that, but it's like, it is like kind of a mark that you have in terms of like a shape in all of the other pieces as well. So it's like, it does look like things are kind of like just like placed on the floor, or like you kind of have with the toys as well.
Yeah. So when you see this, you can tell that, let me just jump back to these, give you a bigger overview of it.
And for those of you who are just joining, I know I saw like Lissa was just joining. Anu is designing in Illustrator right now, kind of going through her process of this packaging design. And so from like some 2D things and bringing them over into Dimension, but right now currently in Illustrator.
Yeah. So when you see like these two images together, or even, let's say I take it up here. So you can see that there are already so many, like I'm going to be using all of these shapes to make, different faces, or even for promotional material, making posters. So what you have to think about is when you use the logo, you will be using it at, let's say if it's a poster, there will be a logo coming in plus all the other graphic elements. So you need to keep in mind that you don't want it to be too much. Like, so finally the logo is really important because that's what the brand is, right? Like you need to know which company or which brand is going to be doing, let's say, a pop-up store or any sort of launch. So it's important that the user sees the logo. So when I have so much already happening on the poster, I don't want there to be any confusion where there are shapes again in the logo and then it's just all getting mixed up. So that's why I decided to go with just a logo type. And yeah, here it is. Again, for those of you who are just joining in, this is a toy design project that I'm working on, and this is the logo that I created for it. And the next step was, so I decided the color palette, and then I decided to go ahead and make a poster for it. So you see what I mean here. What I said before is that if the logo is in the bottom left, so if that had shapes as well, then it could be an easy mix up between all the shapes here, and there are shapes in the left corner, so it could get really confusing. So here it keeps things neat, like there's a division between everything at the top and the bottom. So that just keeps things clean and keeps the eye movement throughout the poster. So next, I did the packaging. Okay, yeah. So for the packaging, I wanted the modular aspect of it to run across this as well. Let me just spin it down a bit. Yeah, so you can see that I've made the graphics run throughout the sides, and as you let's say you fold, so if the packaging is going to be a box, so this whole strip here will go around all the sides. So it tells a story, right? You have a face here, and then all these shapes, and then you have the text about what the toy is. So when you have these overlapping, so these, let's say in this specific part, this eye is going to overlap on two sides. It's not going to be just on one side. So it gives that sort of continuity. And that, again, it adds to the modular part of what I'm talking about, where you can actually view this from any side and still there would be, a story to tell. It's not like each side is independent of the other. So when you start stacking things, let's say in a store, when you need to stack things up, you're actually going to see that. Let me bring in some images to explain better. So what the strip that I have on top is what I've divided into different pieces. So these are the different sides. Right? So these are the 4 different sides that you have to the box. So now, even if let's say on one side of the box, I'll probably be seeing just this phase, right? So the minute you turn the box to the wonky side and you place it here, it's actually going to be like a continuity in the design. So that's what I mean by modular packaging. So yeah, I kept this as an important part of my design process.
It makes sense. It's hard when you're working in like 2D. You always have to kind of remember, bring this to 3D. It's going to have one side and then it's going to flip to the other side of the box.
Right.
And that seam right there. Do I want things to bleed over onto the other side, or like do I just want like to be clean edges on each face of like the box? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I first designed everything on this strip, on this long strip, so that I don't start cutting things as it reaches the corner. So once I designed that, then I cut it into 4 different pieces, and then I see how that's looking because it needs to work as a standalone as well. So let's see, I just push all of these and I just have this. So this needs to work as a standalone and not just as a story. So it's important for you to look at it in both ways, as this long strip over here and just as a standalone. Make sure the standalone looks good, like, because that's what you're going to see. This is the brand name, this is the front of the box. So you need to make sure that this is something that really stands out. So now we can go ahead to Dimension again, and I can show you how to use Dimension for packaging. I'm gonna So you can open multiple tabs, like I mentioned yesterday on Dimension. So make sure you save whatever you're working on and then open the next tab. So here I have the box that I had already made earlier. So the box is something, there are multiple sites where you get like royalty-free 3D objects. So I went ahead and downloaded one of them. Yeah, so this is the box. And what I've done is placed a graphic on each side. So if I go to, so if you double tap on the box, you get the graphic. So I'm gonna just move around the graphic to show you how I've placed it. So the way you place it is just a drag and drop. So let's say I delete that. I'm gonna go to the file. Oh, yeah, here it is. Drag and drop it, and then you can start resizing it. It's not gonna be the same size as your box, so you have to, like, you know, play around with it, like,
so did
change
you
the dimensions.
Did you know the box that you were going to use beforehand, before you created the illustration and sort of the rectangle, in terms of like dimension and everything like that?
No, I didn't. I created the graphic first before I decided what box I was going to use. But I knew that I wanted it to have, like, be a cube, because so one thing that, since you're designing the toy, one thing that you have to do is make sure that all of these pieces, once you design it, so that's why I gave dimensions to these, so that I know how it's going to fit inside the box, and like whether you're going to stack it up, whether you're going to keep it all flat. So I decided to stack it up, and then once I get all these dimensions together, I know what the dimensions of my box are going to be. So that's why I decided to use this sort of a box, and I wanted a handle so that it's just easier to carry. And yeah, so here you can understand here what I mean by having that design run across all the sides. So, oops, there is. So this that you see here, that happens sometimes when you don't align the graphic properly. So the minute you start aligning it properly, you can see that it disappears. So let's say that you have, so in the storefront, let's say you're going to have the packaging face this way. And then what you can do, like, the story to tell is that I can always put the packaging this way as well, right? Stack the boxes this way. And then again, it forms a pattern. It starts to form a pattern. So it's not like the design starts breaking. That's what I like about this, that it always has this continuity to it. Yeah, something like that. As you keep placing the boxes on horizontally, it always like has this continuation.
It's nice. I mean, you have to think about like seeing it in the real world or something as well, right? know you're kind of just coming up with this in your mind and like all of these ideas, there's like, if you're going to make it a reality, right? Like that's how you'd want to like picture it on the shelves and see how it all comes together. And it's like,
Exactly.
like the little things like that are just like a designer's dream. I'm like, ooh, yes. Like it all like comes together, like it creates another little story, or it just is like so clean.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Merchandising is finally like, that's when people see it. So
Yeah.
it's really important. So that's basically how the packaging comes together on Dimension. And you can go to the render tab and render that. I'm going to just show you a quick render preview. Right, that's a render preview. Probably the lighting is too bright. But so I decided to use this box in different sort of settings. So what you can do is select the whole box, go to File, go to Export and Selected Models, and then you can select OBJ. So if you export this as an OBJ, it lets you drag the box onto any other dimension file that you may have. So just hit export and it should be ready to go. So yeah, that's the packaging part of it. That's the second step of this whole branding process. Yep, so here we are. So once you finish the graphic, put it onto Dimension. You can render it there if you feel like, or you can just export the box and take it so that you can bring it on to a different setting. So I'm going to show you one image that I created here. So this is what I mean by exporting the box and bringing it to a different setting. So I didn't want to render the box there alone. I want to give an idea of what the whole product is. So to do that, I have the boxes, I have the shapes lying around, and I have an example of what you can make at the back. And I have these art ports on the side, the connectors, and then this small little thing over here just to show that, you have the shape and the pin underneath to connect. This gives you the whole story of what the product is. So having an image like this is really important because people are not, many people don't want to scroll through the whole project and read everything that you have to say. So have one image that, speaks for the whole project.
I think this one is so cool, like having like a display moment of like everything that you created, the variety like coming together. I also think about just like the moments, like when you think about, okay, I'm going to put this on Behance, or I'm going to show off like in my portfolio, like what I made for this project, having like a variety of moments, like you said,
Yeah.
of like, okay, like I'm going to have just like, if you showed just the faces, like all the time, that's a nice piece, but then like you made so many other things. So showing like, I'm going to show a face, now I'm going to show like everything all together on a board, and now I'm just going to show like, different angle for like this type of piece. Just like makes the whole project feel like you can feel the breadth of like the entire thing that you worked on.
Yeah, and I also have this similar thing in like a rectangular, let's see, just opening this up. Yep, in a rectangular format as well. So it's good to have the same renders in different sort of layouts and different dimensions, just so that you can use it in different places. And it's always difficult, like once you make this and you just you come back to it later, it's always difficult to resize things. So when you do it then and there, it's just better so that you save everything and you can actually use it on different platforms. So I've tweaked this a bit here in the sense that on the right, you actually have the face. It's not just like one small piece there.
I think in terms of like packaging measurements, there was some conversation in the chat around like, do you have any recommendations for any source pages like you might recommend for packaging measurements, or just like as you think through packaging in general, like what are some of your tips or resources that you use?
Yeah, I think, a packaging is very specific to the kind of product that you have or the kind of graphic that you have. So the dimensions are really, up to you. I don't think there's a standard for any dimension as such. It's really up to you. For websites, I guess you can, if you need like some mock-ups, you can check out Artboard Studio. That's one place to, kind of try your designs. There are a lot of packaging mock-ups there. So if you're trying to still figure out dimensions, you're not sure, that's one place where you can try out your design, see if it looks good, and then probably come to Dimension and try to create it. I like creating things on Dimension because it gives you the flexibility to change a lot of things. So if I want to change like the handle color or the size of what designs I want to add on each side. So this gives me that sort of flexibility versus, a mock-up, a downloaded mock-up where you actually can't change everything. So I prefer, like, even if I see a nice mock-up, I prefer actually recreating that sort of thing. If it's a free mock-up, of course, you can try recreating something like that on Dimension.
Nice. Yeah, having like a little bit more of that flexibility.
Yeah. So I just wanted to run through a bit of the mock-ups or like, the brand extension here. So these are like the business cards where I use the different colors. So once you decide what the colors are is when you're going to, put it onto mock-up. So you need to make sure it works well. Using the shapes at the back, just to keep the brand consistency going. I did the Wonky logo in 3D as well, and this was done on Dimension. It's a similar process, so I can quickly, give you a run through of that. So I have Wonky here. All I did was click on the inflate option, and that becomes the 3D Wonky. And I exported this as an OBJ, similar to what I did last time. You go to export selection, and then you have your Wonky here, and then select OBJ and hit export, and just bring it on to Dimension. So I brought it on to Dimension, and then I render it. In this one is in all the different colors of my color palette. You can make, it's up to you on how. I could also make like all in red and all in blue. So this is like a quick example of how you can make a logo in 3D using Illustrator and Dimension together.
Well, and it's good to know because I know yesterday when we were going through the type character challenge, like you were making like an A and you were like really creating it with shapes in Dimension and creating that letter form versus have something so specific like this where you have like all the edges and the W kind of gets bigger and you kind of did a lot of custom things there. It's probably faster to just create the OBJ in Illustrator and then bring that to Dimension versus trying to like make a 3D form of this letter in Dimension.
I think the proportions and the layout and how you want to place things exactly, in that with that spacing and everything, that you can do a lot better on Illustrator is what I feel compared to Dimension. Dimension is, when you know how to use it really, really well, it probably becomes easier. So for me, I can do it on Dimension as well. But even for me, I think that, just putting things on Illustrator just as a placement and then immediately taking it on to Dimension just gives you that ease of your workflow becomes a lot easier. So this is what we worked on in the beginning of the live. So for those of you who are just joining in, this is what we started with. This is the product, the toy. So these are the different pieces and how all the faces come together.
Yeah, and a reminder, in about like 30 minutes, we'll do an artist spotlight. So definitely stay tuned for that. We'll be highlighting an amazing kind of creative out there as well and taking a look at their work just to get more inspiration and kind of see some variety as well. But yeah, it's been cool to see like your process of going through this Wonky project and kind of like piecing it apart bit like piece by piece. Because I think when you see that big first like hero image that you have of everything for the project, it's like, wow, there's like so many pieces to this. And then able to kind of tease apart like each of the different moments in the screen.
Yeah, here it is, the hero image. So here I also want to point out that it's nice to show the different sides of the box. So I made sure that on the left here, even though it's at the back, it's something that you can show, you know, the different, maybe you don't show the bottom of the box. I mean, when you have the box like this, you can't really see the bottom, you can't see the other sides. So it's nice to turn around the boxes and make sure, and, you know, show the viewer that you've thought about everything and not just, you know, the side that's facing you.
I mean, you made it in 3D, you got to show off the 3D aspect.
Yeah.
You gotta get angle there, yeah.
Made some posters. This can be done on Illustrator or Photoshop. Since I have my files on Illustrator, I just, you know, used Illustrator to make them. Something that I added here just to make it more personal is adding names to each character. So I called this character Bob, and I said Mr. Wonky Bob. So I added Wonky to each character name. So you have Wonky Lucy and Wonky Poppy. So that just you have to keep remembering that, you know, you're designing for children. They like you know, these cute little names. So I just added those lines to bring in like some sort of personalization. And here is the poster that I had showed on Illustrator. Let me bring that up. Here it is. So using the different shapes again from the faces that I made, and then adding text inside and having this sort of division. I gave the division because I don't want the whole poster to get, you know, too you know, complex and to like not cause a lot of confusion. So that's like a mock-up version of the poster. One thing I want to open up before I move to the next is this sort of render that you can do. So I'm going to just pull that up on Dimension. So this is like a working file of the image that I had just showed you. I'm gonna just change the camera angle of this, right, to show you that like when you start turning it, it actually starts forming the face, right? So this, I think, is something like, it's such a great tool that you can use to communicate your idea, like, you know, keeping things like straight up and then showing how you can move it down and how it all comes together using the pins on the artboard. So you can actually share, if you go to the top right here, you can actually share a 3D scene with whoever. Let's say you have a client or your teacher or whoever you have, you can publish the 3D scene. So what the other person sees is actually this, where they can start turning things around and seeing how it all comes together. I think that's like a great feature to have, where you can, you know, as a designer, obviously you know what's happening, but for somebody else, this is a great way to explain the whole project.
You should have like a video moment of this, or like a little GIF, like, like quite a few GIFs on your website and everything too. But it like shook. Wow, did not. It's just fun, like seeing the different moments, because I think storytelling wise, when you're just seeing like stills, it made a lot of sense too to show like the moment of them kind of being pins and like how people would play with them and kind of piece them together. But yeah, this is just a fun other angle.
Yeah. Just gonna go back. So what I'm doing here is the camera undo that basically takes you back to the original view that you had. Yeah, there it is. So this one actually has different material. So this is like sort of a plastic thing, which I didn't end up using. I used the fabric texture. And if I hit render preview, you can see that, the shapes are much shinier than what I had. So you're trying to create this is like a scene to explain your project. So you still need to make sure that, so let's see, I remove these planes at the back and like hit render. So it gives you a different sort of feeling in this versus having the two planes on the side. It makes it look like it's in a space, like a room sort of thing. So that's something that I wanted to go with that was intentional. So I put the planes on the side because I wanted attention on this to show that, I mean, you're putting it together in like a room in a certain space. So I didn't want it to be like a hollow sort of back. So adding the joint at the back. So I think you can, when I hit render preview, you can probably see like a slight, joint at the back, which gives you an idea that, okay, this is it's in a particular space.
Totally. I mean, I think it's interesting when you make like 3D things like this, it's not just about the 3D objects themselves, but there's so much you can play with of just like the setting that you want it to be in. Because you've shown us like yesterday, everything was sort of on a flat background. Some of the pieces today have been like kind of set in a room. So you're like very intentionally kind of like as if they're resting on a floor, and you can play with like the different backgrounds.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally different feeling out of that.
Yeah. So since we're speaking about that, I can just quickly shift the camera. Let's see. To the front, maybe just extend the plane at the back. And if you just want to show the shapes, just gonna delete that. So showing the shapes placed differently. So maybe it's just tilted a bit. Yeah. So maybe showing the shape resting at the, at the back on that wall. If you wanna take the shape onto the ground, you can just use this under the action tab. There's a move to the ground icon. So you just click on that and it just tells you where the ground is in case, you don't know where it is. So this is like just like a different kind of setting that you can create, something similar to the one I had made.
So I know you mentioned that this was originally something you worked on as like a prompt in a school project. I think we all want to know, and like Carol was asking, has this been produced and used yet? Like what has come out of this project? Have you like printed anything in real life or made anything, or has this all been sort of this digital project for now?
Yeah, I would want to print it at some point because I do really like how this project has turned out. So I did want to actually maybe even try 3D printing it just to, start photographing and add to my project. Haven't produced it in real, but hoping to one day.
Fun, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is like just a quick other view of, how you can show shapes in a setting.
I like the one outlier, the guy who still stayed at the very top.
Yeah. Yeah. Didn't bring that down yet. Let's do that. Yep.
To the ground. Yeah, but it's fun because there's so much you can play with like very quickly. It's like playing with objects in real life, right? Like if you think about like taking photos or capturing different moments of objects and like the different angles, you're just moving them around in this 3D space, and you still have, even though they're not like tangible things, you have like a lot of variety and opportunities of how you can create different settings in Dimension.
Yeah, so here, let me just quickly shift back to that. Yeah, so this is basically what I created, just like a rough version of changing the image on the right quickly to the one on the left. And the site that I used to get this texture is Substance Share. For anybody who's just joining, this is the site that I used to get the texture, and you can get multiple other textures that are not already there on Dimension. So you guys can go ahead and explore that. So yeah, so we are done with the packaging, and next we do like the couple of posters. So the next step is, let me just open up this file. So once we create the setting, we want to try and see how this would look in an actual store, like while merchandising it. So which is why I created the poster for a pop-up store, and I actually wanted to design a pop-up store. So this is something that I'd shown you guys earlier, and let's go ahead. I'm going to show you the pop-up store first, and then show you how I created it. So this is the pop-up store that I made, entirely made on Dimension. A couple of things that you can get on free 3D sites. So for example, maybe like the stairs or the lights. So these kind very specific things that you have to spend a lot of time on Dimension to actually make them. You can go ahead and use like royalty-free, even Adobe 3D assets. You can bring them in just to add more details to your 3D space. So what I did here was I brought in the OBJ of the packaging that we created, dropped it in here, and then enlarged the shapes that we used to make the faces and placed them again. The shape that I have here, like this sort of concrete shape, is also a shape which I used in my branding. So I just got that in and made it like a sort of like a shelf to place the other shapes, and made it almost life-size, made these shapes almost life-size so that you can actually lift it up and play with it, versus the actual product is actually a bit smaller. And at the back, you can see that I've used these, the faces as like, you can give them off as posters, it can be postcards, any sort of giveaway. And adding again, using packaging on the top over here, like on the shelf over here. So those are just like, details that you can go on adding. And it really shows that, how much attention you have paid to creating this whole space. Adding the t-shirts, this like you want to show like a certain section and not the whole thing where the attention is completely everywhere and there's no like point of focus. So the nice thing here is to have the point of focus in the center where you have the boxes and you have the shapes. That's the main part of the project. So you have that in focus, and then at the back you have all the other extra elements that add to the space.
Yeah, this one's super fun. I think it's also like crazy cool that you decided, okay, I'm gonna now make the pop-up store. It's like one thing after another, but that's, I guess, kind of also how branding projects work in general. You're like, okay, I'm gonna make this, then I have to make this other, then you have the story you have to think about. But I also think it's nice, like you use that material from the toys themselves, also on like the board in the back. So kind of there's moments of like the same color scheme is like coming throughout here. The textures are being placed in some places, not everywhere, not everything is like that kind of material, which is nice, but there's nods to it.
Yeah, so I'm going to
How long would you say something like this took you compared to like the other areas?
I think this took me a while, maybe like a day maybe, to like get everything, not to like design. Like if you know what you're designing, it probably wouldn't take that long. But because I was just trying to figure it out as I design, which is why it took that long. And deciding what elements I need and bringing on each of these graphic elements and like trying to even decide whether I should do the faces at the back or not. Maybe I should put something else, because there's like I've repeated faces again and again, like, throughout the project. So maybe excluding that and trying something else here. So there was a lot of like trial and error before I actually arrived at the final. So yeah, I would say about a day or two, maybe. Like,
I like how you started with, it took me a while. I was not expecting you to be like a day. I'm like, wait, a day? That's technically not really that long. It took you a while. I mean, and yeah, I guess to your point, it's like if you're still exploring, and like we talked about yesterday, it's like, how do you know when to like stop? Because sometimes you can keep going on things, or like explorations, especially. Like that can be a long time in the process when you're like feeling things out, versus like, exactly what it is and what the layout's going to be. It might be more efficient because you're just like taking the time to put the pieces together.
I think, especially creating a space, I think it takes a lot longer. I can quickly switch over, since we've been talking about this project for a while, maybe switch over and show you the other kind of spaces that you can make on Dimension. So this is like a personal project, which I had just, I don't know why I started doing it, but I just started putting the things together on Dimension and creating one space. And then I was like, oh my God, like, you can actually create such nice spaces on Dimension. So I started to do more. And this is something that I initially, I think, first started with. So just using the torus here, and then you have the cylinders, and then all these different planes, and the cube. For this, you can just use a cube, or a cube or a cuboid. So that's what this is. And then you have all these spheres. And using, I think yesterday we also spoke about the ceramic, like the back, where the ceramic texture lets you add patterns. So that's what I had used here. And it's just the same, the same stuff that I've been using all this while, even like for the 36 days, or even for the hairy situation type that I created. It's the same, shapes and the textures, and, you look at what, different kinds of things you can actually do. This is completely different, but it's the same tools. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a cool comparison to see. And I mean, normally I think you're in like the really bold kind of colors. This one is obviously a pastel dream, so kind of a different color tone that you're going for here.
Yeah. And there's this couple of things like the like the coffee maker and maybe the jug and those kind of things you can get on Adobe Assets or any other royalty-free 3D sites. And let's say here, maybe like the roses, those kind of things where you can't, you can't actually make it. So just to add those details to your space, you can start bringing them in. And yeah, you can see like the variety of what you can actually do,
Was there an object in here or something in any of these for this project that were like kind of hung you up, or like made you like spend quite a bit of time on it, or was everything pretty like easygoing?
Again, when I say I spend time on it, I probably spend a day because I do it like, it's not, I do it like continuously, like in one go. I sit and like spend hours on doing it. I don't actually get up and come back to it the next day. So I try to do a majority of it first. So I probably spend like hours. I'm sure I spent like, I don't know, maybe like 8-9 hours, like trying to do my first one. I think actually this was my first one, not the pool one. I think this was the first one that I had made. And I really liked how this turned out. And a lot of people actually start asking me how I created this on Dimension, because when you look at Dimension and when you see the shapes, you actually don't even think that you can create, such a space. But the more you start, just using, like, let's say all these are cylinders, and the same thing I've repeated here. And then again, using the ceramic, the square tiles at the bottom, those things that you can just start repeating over and over and use it in such different ways. And that's how I started to learn how I can create multiple spaces using, just the few things that I actually know. And at that point of time, I was just learning Dimension. So there was still a lot that I had to learn. And yeah, for those of you who are just learning, Dimension, this is also something that you can actually very easily create. Yeah. So this is something that created a lot, like much before Wonky came in. And because I knew how to, now since I've done this, I know how to create a space. So, which is why I decided, okay, let's try doing a space for Wonky. And it'd been a while since I'd made something, made a space. So I was like, why not give it a try? And yeah, here is the space.
Fun to see the contrast. And it's interesting to hear your process of like that sometimes you'll just go heads down and just like in a day, just like sit there and just try and crank out like this whole, like a bunch of like a project, not really getting up or like taking breaks, or like it's not like spread out throughout like the week or whatever. Because I know like for sure in like designers process, everyone's different, but there are, I feel like a lot of people that talk about, I just need like a chunk of time to just like sit down and like jam.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's how I work. I don't like getting up in between because it just takes my attention away, and I just like try to focus when I'm working on one particular project. So yeah, and next I think we can jump into Dimension to show how I actually came up with this whole thing. But we can also do the artist spotlight before I jump into this, because this is like a whole other space. So
like,
maybe
this is the whole thing. It's going to take.
Yeah.
Maybe while we have this break, that is a good idea. So,
Yeah.
All right, we are going to be transitioning into the artist spotlight for the day. So Anu, if you want to go ahead and show off who it is we're highlighting. Today, we're going to be talking a bit about Dev's work, which we're really excited to take a look at and just see, again, like be inspired by someone else's work and get a chance to like see all of the amazing kind of like typography and design that's coming from all of this. So we'll take a few minutes and just like go through what Dev has here on their website.
Yeah, so Dave is actually, he's a graphic designer. He does a lot of typography, and I found him, he's actually a senior from my college. So I really liked his work since the beginning, and to see what, the kind of attention to detail that he has in all of these projects. This is like, I think, a publication project. So for Next Wave Festival at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. So let's just scroll through that. And this is, I think, actually printed and then photographed. So even the way it's presented, it's so clean and neat.
Really cool to have sort of like the different moments here. Like I think like presenting work, like starting with that hero image, kind of like how you do, it seemed like there was sort of like a description text of like what the project was about. And then we're getting like a variety of like moments of the actual artifact itself.
Yeah.
I don't know how long I can look at like spinning books, but this is great. I like like all the angles, right, of everything that they worked on here.
Yeah. And even like when you photograph it, you can actually see the kind of paper he's used. So it's actually a bit see-through, so you can see what's at the back. And I really like those kind of details. And here, I love this.
Yes.
And I know that he's probably added the image on the left just to show that shine and how it looks in real. So it's great to see that like this is not a mock-up and it's actually, printed and photographed.
I mean, that is everything. I mean, when you have something shimmery like that, I feel like all you want to do is one of these to like see what it looks like. So it's a really nice touch to just have that on the left-hand side there.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. And here again, you can see the kind of paper, like it's really well lit, and the photograph is so good that you can see the kind of paper that he's used, and then using the gold with the black, and then still and having that sort of the colored, squares at the back. I think just it adds so much. I mean, imagine if this wasn't, translucent. If it was just opaque, it would make such a big difference. It would be there'd be so much white space and it would be so empty. So just changing the paper, but having the same, graphic, it makes such a big difference.
Yeah, that texture, like that paper on top, I just want to I want to touch it. I'm like,
yeah, I know. Yeah.
I'm super curious. But yeah, to your point, it's cool like playing with the layering then, like knowing that there's that kind of that transparency. You can kind of play with more of a visual with the like pops of color behind it and like the blocks, like rectangles that are happening. So I really like that. And I think to your point too around the photography of this, the black like background is really a nice choice because I feel like it just helps his work pop so much more, like compared to using a black or like a black, using black, white, or like a like gray or some color or something. Like the black is just really clean and lets like his work here really stand out.
Yeah, definitely. Love the typography. I think it's really different. I haven't seen anything like it, which is why, I chose his portfolio, because I think it's so unique. The way he uses the type, the overlapping, and I feel like if I had to do something like this, like I wouldn't know whether what I had done was like something good or something bad, because like these things, you'd learn it over time. It's not something you can just do and it looks great. I'm sure he's gone through a lot of rounds of iteration to actually achieve this. So when I see people do things that I really can't even think of doing, that's when I'm like, oh my god, this is so good.
Totally. And this isn't, again, like I think playing with like quite a bit of like layering and transparency, which is still cohesive with sort of like the beginning part of this project.
Yeah, and the kind of colors that he's used, over here you have just like this black and white going, and then suddenly he's introduced all these really bold colors with white on it. So I think that's like a good switch. And I also love this. Again, it gives you that paper, like you just want to feel that paper.
Yeah.
Over here.
I almost want to say like a vellum or something.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of in terms of material there, but there's just so much like, again, like moments of, it's not just about one page, but what you're seeing through the next one. And kind of as you flip, you have things on the right side, or you also have it on the left, and kind of being able to like layer on top of it kind of creates this like organized chaos that I like.
Yeah. And and there are so many of these books here, like zines, and then he's like shown the open version of each, and there are like 5 to 6 pages in each. So that shows, how much he's actually gone deep into the project. And probably if it was me, I would have just shown how one looks and then, gone ahead with it. But after seeing this, I'm like, okay, I really need to go in depth into each project and show each page and how much I've worked on it. So, I mean, even the person looking at it knows, how much effort has gone into it.
And there's small details too, like on this, one thing that I really like is like the numbers at the bottom, the like 3, 5, 7, they are not overlapping on top of each other, because that you're still going to see it through the rest of the pages. So they're like very intentionally placed next to each other. Whereas normally when you think of page numbers, right, like they're all in the bottom right-hand corner or something. So this is like very intentional, knowing like the material that's going to be used and like having that small moment. It's like small things like that. And I'm sure there's like a ton of small details as you like probably look more at like the pages flipping through.
Yeah, there's just so much here, even he's just put so many things here, and then even the numbers are here.
Speaking of, I like that.
Yeah, so the level of detail, like even here you can see the 2 audiences is on one page and then arrives on the next page, but you can actually read the whole thing here. So really nice, like unique ways of showing how you can do publication. Yeah, I think it's really well thought through and so much in it.
I'm obsessed with the gold. The gold. I love a good gold moment.
think another quick one we can look at is he does this generative typography, which I think is really, really interesting. So I think I think this uses P5.js, and JavaScript to make this generative type.
Very cool. Yeah, and I think Amit Scott was saying that they liked his composition and layout, like from the previous one, and sort of the contrast between text and images. Totally agree.
Oh, the previous one, yeah.
It's really interesting to see like something contrasting like this project in terms of like the other one was sort of like this print with layout and like, you know, layers and textures and everything. And this is all about like typography and the form and like motion and animation.
Yeah. And this is just like all the ampersands in different styles. So yeah, I really like how creative he can get just with one form. And I especially like this one, the green one. Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, wait, go back. I'm trying to see which one's my favorite.
Oh.
Like, ooh, which the one that caught my eye very quickly was obviously the one where it kind of looks like it's raining and it's kind of hitting against the ampersand.
Yeah.
So many cool like little moments in some of these. And I do like choosing sort of a different colorful background to create a little bit more variety too for each of these. This is cool.
I mean, you're going away from, you know, maybe After Effects and like trying coding. I think that's I think upcoming. I don't know if like a lot of people are doing it already. I'm sure there are, but I feel like that's still a great space to, you know, explore. And yeah, he has a lot of, I think this is also animated. So just touching upon the 36 days of type, since we did it yesterday. So his was an animated version, which I also thought was, you know, it just uses simple shapes, but it's totally different. Like so much he's done with just using this rectangle.
I mean, it's fun to see. I mean, there's also, I mean, every artist is totally different. I think that's what's so like fun about every like type, everyday type. I can't even speak. Everyday letter type thing. But like, yeah, working on that because your style is also that's like color. There's a lot of color. There's a lot of like round edges. I think his is using a lot more sort of like harsher edges. You have more rectangular forms, right? There's kind of this animation, which is really awesome. And there's quite a bit of like gradient use actually too in this particular project.
Yeah. Yeah, really like how, I mean, it's so different from my aesthetic, which is why I can appreciate it so much. I just want work. At this point, I think I want work that's different. I want my portfolio to have something that's not bright and not playful. So looking at other people's work this way, you know, gives me some sort of idea on where I should be going or what I should be doing. So animated posters, pretty cool.
Yeah, I get quite a variety of like different projects here on the portfolio.
Yeah. I would want to learn like more of animation probably soon.
A little bit on yours.
Yeah, become better at it.
The right hand one, the black and white kind of squiggly lines. Yeah.
This one?
Yeah. Thought I saw this one on his Behance as well.
Yeah, I think this is there on Behance. This was, I think, really, really interesting because he used DNA to actually create the type. And he went through like this whole process of this genetic code and life forms and, you know, the thought process behind all of this and the research that he had done before arriving at different typefaces. I think like that's something I could have never even thought of, you know, using genetics to think of typography.
Totally. Well, I think a lot of times too, like sometimes what's nice on like a portfolio is it's not always just about like the visual work itself, but it can be about like your process or the
Yeah,
like way that you thought about things. And people can be looking at your work and just be trying to understand like how do you think through like your projects and like what's your process. So seeing something like this and like a different kind of approach can also make you appreciate the work itself a bit more, but also just like
yeah,
how like an artist or a creative works for like if you want to end up working with them on something.
yeah. I really like this, this poster that he had done. Pretty nice. Yeah. The research on this is like great. Could never have thought of this.
I'm gonna have to dig into this one more later on. But
Yeah,
yeah,
we really need to read through.
someone threw in Dev's portfolio and everything in this website, so definitely check out their work. Really excited that we had a chance to like spotlight some of the things that they're working on and see like something that's totally in contrast, I think, to like the
Yeah,
things we've been looking at, which with all the colors and
yeah,
the projects today. But again, it's like you can get so much inspiration by looking at what other people are.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Oh,
So I
well,
think we can jump back to Illustrator. So I can just give you guys a quick like summary of what has happened so far. So we started off by we did the Wonky project, which is a toy design project where we designed the toy first. So we started off with making these, getting all the different parts of the toy together. So these are all the different shapes and the connectors. So using this, we tried making faces. So this is one of the faces that I made. And here are like the other possibilities. There are many more you can make. These are just some examples that I made. And yeah, so once you do that, you can actually convert them into 3D objects and export them as an OBJ and take it on to Dimension. So once you take it onto Dimension, you can render it. And let me just quickly pull up the faces. Yeah, so once you render it on Dimension, you can, so this is your 2D version from Illustrator, and this is your 3D version from Dimension. Apply materials, color, texture, and there comes your 3D face. So once we did that, we moved on to packaging. Oh, sorry. So here are a few other renders of the shapes. These are just two different settings of the shapes. And so we moved on to packaging next, where I showed you guys the different, like making packaging modular. And so this, let me just place it correctly. So these are the different sides, and this is like, it shows you how the design is continuous. So whichever side you place it, there's actually a sort of continuity throughout. So once we did that, we did the packaging render. This is an important part because it tells you, it basically explains the whole project here. All of the shapes, the packaging, an example of the face at the back. So this is like what the whole project is. It tells you the story in one picture. And next we jumped on to this, where I actually made a space, like a Wonky pop-up store using Dimension. So this, I'm going to open up that file to show you how I got it all together. Let's see. I'm going to quickly pull that up. I think I should be able to find it here. Yeah, here it is.
The Wonky Store.
Yeah, it's a heavier file, so the loading time usually takes slightly longer. Yeah, here it is. So I brought it up yesterday that when you have different textures, a lot of different elements, the render time and the loading time is always longer. So just be patient about that. Yeah. So this is my working file. I'm going to change the camera angle just to show you how messy it is from the outside. It all has like all these different things. You know, it's not your design. What you're designing is basically just one section of it. So I'm not, like, my intention was not to design the whole store, which is why I have all these empty spaces on the sides and all of that. So that's the messy part of the file. And this is what I want to present to the viewer. I'm going to break it apart a bit. So this shape that you see here is what I've got it through. One sec, let me just try rotating that. Yeah. So I've got this through Illustrator. I basically made the shape on Illustrator and extruded it and got it onto Dimension. Exported as an OBJ if you guys want to get it onto Dimension. Yeah. And got all of these shapes from the faces that I had made it bigger, made it life size, and kept it, and made this object like act like a shelf, like a staircase or like a shelf.
The little pedestal for the mustache and little pieces,
yeah. Because I wanted it to have like more focus, like more attention. So which is why I wanted to place those things in the center. And I have the boxes here. Again, got them through OBJ. Got them as an OBJ through Dimension. You can export things, whatever object you want to get onto other files, export them as an OBJ so that you can drag and drop them in. And here I placed two of these, like the boxes together, just to show that the design is actually continuous. There's no point if I just show the front, because I want to show that it was intentional that I created the design that way. Having these are planes, I think. Yeah, these are planes on which I added a graphic. So one sec. I'm just gonna place that back. Yeah. So how you do that? I'm just gonna run through that again quickly. So when you have, when you select the graphic, it actually gives you those dimension, like the circular thing, which you can adjust your dimensions with, and then you can move it around. And then I'm basically placing it in the center. So yeah, that was that. Things like this, like those are just elements that I want to add to my space. It's not necessarily like the main part of it or anything like that. As a whole, I wanted to look like a nice pop-up store that's coming together. So few things here and there which you can bring in through objects that you find on Adobe stock. The lighting, the material that I used for the lighting is, I think, let's go in and see what it is. I think it's metal. Yeah, it's metal. And then the light itself, the circle, okay, let me zoom in so that you can see that more clearly. So the light itself is glass, and I gave this little yellow tint so that when you render, you can see that it's like sort of like lights on.
Subtlety. I mean, I'm curious what you ended up doing for the lighting as well. Like, I think at the front seems a little bit lighter than the dark. Like, what were your thoughts on how you wanted to light the pop-up store?
Yeah, so in this, I actually used sun. So the sun is what you can see in directional lights on the left panel. So you can see sun and the square light, 3-point light. So I selected sun for this. And let's see how it looks. Yeah, so when I take it off, you can see how the lights like disappeared from certain parts. So again, a lot of trial and error, because once you add lighting, it's not like you can immediately tell how it's going to look. You have to keep doing this preview render that I'm doing. Yeah, that's happening right now. So I keep doing this and seeing, okay, is the lighting working or not? Do I need to rotate it? So when you keep the render preview on and you keep trying to change the lighting, that could take longer for it to load. It increases it's working a lot more for it to render and to change the lighting. So instead, it's always better to keep the render preview off and just, make it go around, see what sort of lighting you want, and then click on render preview and see if it works for you or not. So here I've used sun with, you can change the intensity, change the rotation, height, and cloudiness. So cloudiness is basically just like on a rainy day, how things look. So that's sort of what cloudiness is. It reduces the harshness of that light if you increase the percentage of cloudiness. And let's see what I did too. Yeah, so for environmental light, I did change the rotation and the intensity. It's pretty, it's a pretty stark white. So just to get that down like 10% and start and render that and see how that looks. So a lot of trial and error. I wouldn't say that there's like a perfect way you can just put things and, it's just a perfect render. You just have to keep doing the render preview and seeing how it looks. Added, so you can see that I have like metal, I have glass, I have matte, I have this fabric texture. So all of this like increases the render time. So I think I took about, if you render it on medium, I think it takes about 40 to 45 minutes, I think, which is also pretty quick. I think maybe other software might take longer. I'm really not sure. I haven't used it, but I thought like 30 to 40 minutes was pretty quick. But if you render it on high, yeah, it could go to like an hour or so.
And then you just grab a snack and you go do something.
Yeah. Yeah, just start working on something else or go get a snack. What else can I break down?
Those shelves in as well on the top where you put more of the packaging?
Yeah, so this is just like a cube, the cube shape that I just made it rectangular and put that as a shelf. And I added the cylinder over here as like over here the cylinder acts as like the holder for the shelf. Again, those are details. You actually don't have, there are like shelves which can just stand there, but the more you add like these small details, the better the whole layout, the whole space gets. This, I thought I'd place some plants just to make it a little greener. Let's see, there's the board. So when I move the camera, you can see that there's like a lot of these gaps. So those gaps actually depend on like the front view. For me, because I was doing just the front view, I like compromised on the spaces a bit. I did keep more space than required at the back because what I want is just the front view. If I was doing a side view, then obviously I would change the spacing more and adjust it. But yeah, so it depends on what view you want, and then accordingly you can adjust everything. Also got in the Wonky logo from Illustrator, again changing it using that inflate option and bringing it in. And yeah, these shirts are actually on Dimension. Let's see where that is. Yeah, the t-shirt here. So I just pull that in and just act as merchandising, put some wonky colors, and yeah, that's also another detail.
Wonky swag, make some design some wonky brand.
Yeah, that's one thing maybe I should add to producing it in real. Yeah.
So did you start with the room itself, like the makeup of the room, or did you know that you wanted to have this display in the front and put the display and then create the room around it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually did put the display first because this is what I wanted. The most importance on is this. So I created this first, and then I started to put things at the back. So even things like adding like a blue color here, because it's so strong, the blue, it might actually take away from the focus from the central point. But I can actually, I'm going to just switch the color to show you how it looks a lot more different if I change the color actually. Let's say I just keep it a white.
When you have the blue pill like kind of shape in the front on the right hand side, so it's kind of a nice moment to bring your eye all the way over to the other side of the room, and then again up in the small moment on the other shelf with the blue.
I'm gonna just quickly render that. So you can immediately feel like the empty, like, so because I'm so used to looking at that blue, I feel like the block, it creates like a block over there, and it's just like not plain white. But the minute I change into white, it's like you just see like a white space with many colorful things versus like this blue wall that creates sort of like a color block. So that's what again, like trial and error, right? You keep adding, removing, seeing how things look, and that's how this all comes together.
Totally. Well, I know that we're just about at time. So
Yeah.
I want to thank you, Anu, for joining us on the live stream. I know this was your very first one on Adobe Live, and we're so happy to have you and be able to get a sneak peek into your process and all of the work. So thank you so much. And for those of you watching, really thankful that you all joined us today. Stick around and watch the Illustrator Creative Challenge with Claudie coming up. And then immediately that will be followed by day 2 of the vector art character design with Natasha. So thank you all so much, and thank you, Anu.
Thank you. It was great being here. Thank you so much.